سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم رب زدني علما. So continuing in our Sirah class. So last we heard about the very tough circumstances of the boycott which took place in the years of 7, 8, and 9, 3 years of boycott. No intermarriage, no intercommerce, and the trials and tribulations that were sustained in that boycott one can only imagine. And of course, as we mentioned, some people had a little bit better plot if they had somebody working from outside helping them, but the rank and file of the common Muslims had no such type of assistance. It's mentioned that even they would go to the extent of wetting, the leaves with their own urine and eating. Wetting the leather, chewing on leaves. So can we imagine, if we were put in the situation where either, you follow the religion of your ancestors, or we follow other than Islam, whatever that might be, either be a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever, or otherwise starve to death, be totally ostracized. So what would our condition be? How would we react in that situation? Just imagine. And so this was, a crystallizing, a catalyzing effect, on those. And not only that, also it's interesting that the tribal bind was so strong, you see, that even people who were from Bani Hashim and Bani al-Muttalib, who were not actually Muslims, but they underwent that boycott as well because of the tribal, Hamiyat al-Jahiliyyah, actually, this tribal feeling of, loyalty to the tribe. So it's interesting, if you don't have loyalty to Allah, then you have loyalty to something, And if it's not placed in the right place, then even though loyalty is something of praiseworthy nature, but if it's placed in the wrong place, again, it's of little use. So now, the boycott has been lifted, and it looks like things are, sort of, there's light in the tunnel, as it were. However, the light was soon to be extinguished in the following year, which is the 10th year of the Bi'athah, which is known as the Am al-Huzn, the year of sadness. And the first and the most compelling sadness was, and overpowering sadness was, the death of Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, the first Muslim, the first woman to accept Islam. And not only that, the first consoler, the first consultant for Rasulullah. So she was much more than just a wife. She was the support of Rasulullah. She was his companion, his best friend, soulmate, if you will. And when even he himself was shooken to the bone, in the first revelation, it was Khadija radiallahu ta'ala that comforted him and mentioned of all his falal, of all his virtues, that you help the poor and the needy, and you taqsib al-ma'doom, you give what no one else can give and what cannot be found anywhere. You have these sterling qualities that no one else has. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let you be squandered away. He will never let you be, wasted, your efforts and your beautiful akhlaq. So she was with him for the very moment. And so one can only imagine, with the death of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, what a sadma, what a trauma this must have been for Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. At the same time, of course, that has an outward dimension, but more importantly, the inner, connection, with such a magnanimous person, and your wife of, of all of this time, even though she was quite senior in years to Rasulullah. She was probably around 65 at the time, and he was around 50 years of age. However, not only that, now Abu Talib also passes away. Now Khadija the inner support and the home support, if you will. And now the one barrier which is actually holding back the wrath of Quraysh was Abu Talib, because he was the chieftain of the clan of Bani Hashim, and even though he was not the person of Quraysh, but he was one of the major people of Quraysh, and because of his protection, so Muslims were somewhat, guarded in pursuant to that tribal system. And particularly Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, nobody could really take drastic measures against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as long as Abu Talib is alive. Now, with Abu Talib dead, now Abu Lahab takes over. So now it's really intense. And very interestingly, you might have heard this story. If not, then we'll mention that at the time of the death of Abu Talib, it was a very heart-rending event. And actually, he became ill. He became quite ill, and it's quite apparent that now he's in his last throes. And so now all the chieftains of Quraysh were there at the bedside, among them Abu Jahl and others. And Sayyidina Abbas, who had, of course, by that time had not yet accepted Islam. And so, interestingly, they said to Abu Talib, now they see that Abu Talib is leaving the world, and now they've had a very long, chaotic past 10 years with the event of this new religion. And obviously, if we can find a way to have peaceful, coexistence, I would, of course, any intelligent person would understand that would be more advantageous. So they said to Abu Talib, look, why don't you propose to you see that you're in the condition that you are and you're about to leave this world, so why not let's have a proposition with your nephew. We give something, he gives us something. Right? Let's see if we can't come to some, let him leave us alone. Let us carry on, and we'll leave him alone. So it sounds like a good proposal. So when this was offered, and then Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam actually came, and then it was offered, and he mentioned, to his nephew that the chieftains of Quraysh are saying such and such, and his brother Mar saying so and so. Can you oblige them? And so he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, something to the effect like this: that I only want from them one sentence. I only want from them one word. And if they would just say this one word, that's all I want. Then the entire Arab nation, Danulum al-Arab, the entire Arab nation is going to, succumb to them and surrender to them. And not only that, but the kingdoms of Persia will become, their slaves and come under their authority. So when the chieftains of Quraysh hear this, kalima wahida, one word, that's all you want? Bal ashara, we'll give you 10, what is it? He said, just say, La ilaha illallah. You will not worship except Allah, and you will leave all of that other worshipping of other than Allah. So what were they fighting about for the past 10 years anyway? This is what they were fighting about. So obviously Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam is not going to budge. And also they understand that there's no point in carrying on the discussion any further. And they give up. So now, Abu Talib, it's also mentioned that Abu Talib at this point, mentions that this is not a big thing to ask of them. It's a reasonable proposition. So now Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam is hoping that now my uncle, after all these years, he's on his deathbed, if he at least would say this kalima. And he still tells to his uncle that, oh my uncle, just say this kalima so that I can be your intercessor, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and give witness, and you will be safe. And so he's looking at his nephew, then he looks at the chieftains, and they're looking, what's he going to do? Now Abu Talib, he has this, and not only he has such a love for his nephew, also Abu Talib was one of the, if he wasn't one of the greatest of the poets, but he was a very accomplished poet as well. And the poetry that he had written in praise of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, if you read that, it's heart-rending. And the beautiful poetry. So he had this love and affection, not only love and affection, but this high esteem. And it's as though he really believed, yes, what he's telling is truth, but at the same time, he is that tribal, the overpowering of that tribal feeling, the dedication or the loyalty to one's tribe. And loyalty to one's tribe means loyalty to their traditions and their customs and their habits. And the most important custom and habit is their aqidah and their belief. So therefore, that he's torn between, yes, my nephew, whatever, he must be correct, but my loyalty to the tribe. And in the end, unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, the tribal allegiance overpowered the better, his better conscience. And so while he's now looking towards his nephew and then looking towards the chieftains of Quraysh, and they're saying, you would die on other than the millet of Abd al-Muttalib, your father. And this is ala millati Abd al-Muttalib, and he passes away. There's other riwayats, but not very strong. This is the strong riwayat, and this is the strong narration, which also coincides with the Quran. Also alludes to إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. And the Mufassirin all mention that this is regarding Abu Talib, that, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you don't guide whom you like, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whom He likes. وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. And He knows best who is actually in the search of guidance. Even though his name was Abu Talib, the one who was seeking. And of course, the father of the Talib, because his eldest son his name was Talib. However, apparently the talab was not for hidayat. The talab was more about keeping that position that he had as the tribal chief, and that was dominated in the end. However, there's another riwayat which that mentions that Sayyidina Abbas radiallahu anhu, who, as we mentioned, was not a Muslim at that time, he saw that Abu Talib is mentioning something saying something which is not discernible. So he listens, and then he mentions to Rasulullah that your uncle has said what you wanted him to say. So he replied, but I didn't hear, I don't know, I guess. But also the apparent verses of the Quran do not collaborate with that. Also, Sayyidina Abbas himself asked Rasulullah at one point that your uncle Abu Talib has protected you and he defended you and he really sacrificed his life. Were you able to help him at all? In other words, after his death. He said, yes, I was able to help him to this extent that he has been placed in the highest rank of Jahannam. And in that highest place, because we probably mentioned, just as paradise is darajat, it's not all one station, it's many, many stations. So the Jahannam is also darakat, it is also steps down. Jannat is steps up, Jahannam is steps down. So he said Abu Talib is in the highest stage. Under the arches of his 2 feet are coals which are boiling the brains in his head. That's the least of punishment. And it's also mentioned in another hadith that a person is getting this punishment, and probably he's referring to Abu Talib. And he thinks he's getting the worst of punishments, whereas it is the least of punishment, Jahannam. And he said if it had not been for me, then he would have been in the lowest ranks of Jahannam. I mean, he was there with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam all that time and he didn't accept Islam. Anyway, which is so not only the sadness of losing his uncle, whom obviously he had great love and affection for and who had been at his side and protected him when nobody was prepared to do so. And he actually put his life on the line. So losing his uncle on the one hand, and then losing his uncle without accepting Islam, you can imagine what a trauma that would have been. And he's lost Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. Allahu Akbar. However, the sadness doesn't end there. It depends how much time you would like to sit. Are you ready to sit for a little bit longer? If so, then we can continue. Huh? Yeah. Heaven and hell are already there. They have already made makhluqatan, mawjudatan. Heaven and hell are already created and they're there. They have not been filled up. They will be filled up on the Day of Judgment, or after the Day of Judgment, that is to say, after it's decided. But, so seeing him there can mean either that he actually was there, or seeing that would be his position. Follow? Yeah. But heaven and hell are already created. They're waiting to be filled. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, after Barzakh, yeah. So, one last, there's a number of very amazing or very important events that took place at this time. So we'll mention one more. So now, let's look at now number two of the Ummah, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, as we've known that he is going through trials and tribulations, and in the beginning, just like Rasulullah, he was one of the very highly respected members of Quraysh. And although he wasn't one of the chieftains per se, but he was a very influential, well-off, and known for his very sterling character. And often people would come to him to judge in matters and make peace among people, etc. So now, after all this time, after 10 years, creating friction with Quraysh, and especially emancipating slaves and who have accepted Islam, like Bilal and others. And so now it's getting really difficult. His own tribe is also, Bani Taym are taking their hands off and saying, we're not responsible, we're not going to protect him any longer. And so the tribes that were protecting these individuals also were, stepping back, which would give a free hand, to the enemies. So Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, there's various riwayats of different types of, different types of, punishments, you might say, or difficulties that he had to experience at the hands of Quraysh. And so finally, as we know that people have already started making hijrah, so he also asked Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam that it's getting too much, there's no one here to really protect me, and so I want to migrate to Abyssinia. So permission was given, he makes his way. On the way, he meets Abu Daghna, who was one of the Bedouin chiefs, one of the tribal chiefs, who knew Abu Bakr very well. And he sees Abu Bakr, a very respectable man whom he knew very well and had a very high regard for him. And here he's walking, he seems to be, really in a bad condition. He looks very distraught, and his clothing and his everything, and where are you going? He said, I'm not able to worship my Allah as I want, and so I'm leaving this land and going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where I can, in other words, in Ethiopia. So Abu Daghna, who knew Abu Bakr and being the tribal chief and having a very sort of tough character, he said, someone of your likes is not sent out from his people and is not disgraced like this. So I'm not hearing it, even though he's not. This is one of the amazing qualities of the Arabs and those Bedu and the Arabs of the desert. You can say a lot, negatively about them, but they had amazing qualities, and this was a stance that you would see that this, So he actually said, no, you're not, I'm not allowing this, and I am your protector. And as we mentioned, that tribal system of protectorates, if any person from whatever major tribe says, this person is under my protection, all the tribes have to honor that, and that was part of their code. It was very interesting, regardless. So he said, you come with me and you're under my protection. So he went back to Makkah with Abu Bakr. And he came right into the Kaaba. He told the chieftain of Quraysh this Abu Bakr, mithluhu la yukhraj. Someone of this status and of this caliber is not sent out of his and he doesn't leave his place, you know. So why are you? So he's under my protection. They said, okay, look, we honor your protection, however, under this condition. Because he is, you know, reading Quran. Actually, Abu Bakr was not like Umar and Hamza that was challenging people, but his nature was so attractive, and so many people were accepting Islam as a result of his character and his recitation of Quran and his kindness and his spending on everyone, emancipating the slaves, etc. So they said, okay, we honor your protection, however, ensure that he worships Allah in the sanctity of his own home and doesn't come outside and, you know, present this new religion to everybody else, because our young people and our women are getting, you know, carried away. They're getting, you know, seduced, as it were. He said, yeah, okay. So this is the condition. So Abu Bakr, you honor this. And Abu Bakr, he said, okay, fine. So initially, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was worshipping Allah in his house. He was praying, making salah, and reading Quran. And then he felt like he made a little place outside of his house, you know, sort of like on a veranda kind of a thing. And he started offering his salat and reading the Quran. And in doing so, just as Quraysh was fearing, the women and children would come and listen. And they were just so overawed with this. And so now, you know, he's crossed the limits. So Quraysh said, no, we're not having this. So they called Abu Daghina to Ibn Daghina to come and said, look, your man whom you're protecting, there was the condition that he was not going to, you know, seduce our people by worshipping, you know, outside and reading Quran and, you know, getting our women and children all taken away by this. He said, yeah, that was the condition. He said, Abu Bakr, he said, you know. So Abu Bakr told him, he said, look, I'm going to worship Allah as I like, and if you're not going to protect me, then I don't need the protection except Allah's protection. He said, okay. And he said, okay, I give up my protection. So now Abu Bakr, again, he's now placed himself under very tough circumstances, and now he's without a protector. And in that tribal system, it means it's like you're, you know, in the jungle among the lions and the tigers and the cheetahs, and you have no big lion to protect you, right? So now, and we have a number of other incidents in this particular year of Hazan that will culminate ultimately in a turning of events, and inshallah we'll be looking into that next week, and inshallah